This is the Humans of Gaming podcast, an open and honest conversation about games, life, and belief.
Hello and welcome to Humans of Gaming. I'm Drew Dixon. I'm the Chief Content Nerd at Love Thy Nerd, and I'm joined with Chris Gwaltney, our Chief Executive Nerd. How's it going, man?
Hey, I'm Chris. You stole my thunder and said my title, so
Yeah.
Here I am.
Good luck. You're here. You have any good
Big
week,
news,
man?
Big news.
Big news?
I beat Sekiro last night.
Ooh, congratulations.
The game is a masterpiece. I'm just calling it now.
Man, I, as I said on Facebook recently, I wish people would stop talking about it because it makes me want it really bad.
I did buy it physically, and so I could be persuaded to mail it to you.
Oh, yeah.
But
okay.
You might have to wait because I think I have another friend that wants to play it, but I don't know. We'll see.
So here's the question, though. Like, this other friend, is he more important in your life than me?
I was afraid you were going to ask that.
Just kidding. Don't answer that. I really don't want to know because if it's not favorable to me,
let me just tell you. Let me just tell you this, Drew. Flattery will get you everywhere with me.
Okay. All right, Chris, you're a wonderful human being, and you do a great job with Love Thy Nerd. I'm really excited to be going to California with you next month. Yeah. We have a special guest, and that's Kate Edwards. Hey, Kate.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Kate.
Hello.
You have done a lot, I feel like, in the games industry. You were the executive director of the International Game Developers Association for several years. You're a geographer. How do you introduce yourself when you talk about the work you've done? And continue to do in the games industry.
Yeah, I guess typically what I tell people is that I'm a culturalization strategist or consultant and a industry advocate. So typically that kind of helps encapsulate those two sides of my brain. That is most of the activity that I'm involved with. So yeah, that's basically how I would characterize it, if I want to put it really simply.
Yeah. So put those. I mean, because I feel like I understand what you're talking about there, but I think maybe the average gamer doesn't realize what those terms mean. So What do you mean when you say you're a cultural strategist within the realms of the games industry?
Yeah, so basically I am a geographer and a cartographer. That's my academic background, and I actually worked in the field. I ended up going into Microsoft and helping them with all kinds of geopolitical and cultural issues and across all the Microsoft products, like country names and use of gestures and icon design and all of that stuff. And around the time when Microsoft was pushing into the game sector with all their PC games like MechWarrior and Astronaut's Call and Age of Empires and all that stuff, I worked on all of those as I was basically kind of more clandestinely at first helping out people in the games group because that was my mandate. I had eventually went on to create a geopolitical strategy team, I called it, at Microsoft. So basically made up my job, figured out a way to help the company avoid making political and cultural risks across all their content, which included all the games. So at first, the games work was pretty informal. It was just kind of behind the scenes, helping an editor here and an artist there, but eventually it would go on to become a much more formal process that would go across every game at Microsoft. So I was really fortunate in my time there, which I was there for 13 years
you said
total.
Across every game Microsoft made?
Yes, on PC and Xbox. Yes.
Wow.
So pretty much all of that stuff, all the Halos and Fable and Age of Empires and Forza, and I don't even remember them all, frankly. I know it was
Too
a lot.
many.
I know it was a lot.
So you were kind of helping Microsoft not make a lot of missteps in the way that they handled a lot of these things.
Yeah, basically. I mean, because what I saw happen, we actually had this very specific incident, which I won't go into all the details because it's a lengthy story, but basically they had an incident in 1997 that really, really upset the Korean government. And it was over some content issues in the Encarta World Atlas program that, because I worked on Encarta. That was my first job at Microsoft.
Oh, man.
That was, which I often have to explain to people who are not of the similar age that was
I know.
the precursor.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That word. Oh.
Yeah, so that was the precursor to Wikipedia. I mean, that's what a lot of the world used before Wikipedia. They used Encarta, and so I'd worked on Encarta Encyclopedia and the World Atlas product. And but yeah, they had this big snafu which made the Korean government upset, and it caused a lot of headaches and problems. And the main issue in that time when this happened in 1997 is that we made a mistake in Encarta World Atlas, and we fixed it. And then we told the government that we were going to make sure that mistake was not propagated in other programs. Well, 3 months later, the very first Age of Empires was released, and they had the same error that we just told the government we would fix. And of course, the issue is that, Encarta is made on one side of the company in a completely different product group, and Age of Empires in another. And those groups were not talking to each other because, frankly, at the time, they really didn't have a reason to.
Sure.
And that was really it. That was what gave me the spark of the idea that somebody in the company needed to make sure that this kind of knowledge is coordinated across all the products, because, for governments, they don't see Age of Empires or Encarta. They just see Microsoft. They don't see all the subtlety of it. And frankly, they're right. I mean, it's on the company's shoulders to make sure all that stuff is corrected. And so that's basically how that group was born. And went on to manage that for 7 years before I left in 2005.
That's so wild. I love hearing about... No, you don't ever... I've never once in my life, prior to you talking about this right now, ever thought that was someone's job. Or like these obscure things, obscure to the layman like me, that you just never think about. And I love hearing about that stuff. Because it broadens your perspective, and it gives you, I think, sometimes like a deeper appreciation, Yeah. So that's so cool that even that you saw that need and like filled it, created your job, like you said.
It wasn't easy. I mean, I when I came up with the idea, I originally called it the Microsoft Office of International Affairs, which frankly they thought was a little too grandiose. So that's
I love it though.
Yeah, I still kind of have a fondness for that. But eventually that's why it just became simply Geopolitical Strategy is the group name. But it took me 7 months and shopping.
That also kind of sounds like you're an international agent or something.
Yeah, it does. And actually, we actually had an internal program to get other Microsoft employees to help us out. And we did, in fact, call them agents because we wanted to kind of get them into the spirit of it with the whole kind of spy James Bond thing so that they would actually help us. And they did to a great degree. But the idea didn't come easy because after I came up with an initial proposal, it took me 7 months to shop it around to different VPs around the company. And after it took me 5 tries. And eventually the last VP, he approved it almost immediately. And I tend to believe that's because he was the only VP who was not from the United States. He was actually from South Africa. So he fully understood what was at stake.
Wow. So, I mean, once you kind of had that job going, I mean, did that take you abroad a lot, or was most of it still just done from here in Seattle?
No, it was. Yeah, I did travel a lot. I mean, I once I created the Geopolitical Strategy team, I did start traveling quite a bit because one of the things I realized very early on, in order for my job to be successful, I had to have the ear of all the general managers of the subsidiaries of the Microsoft, of Microsoft in the different countries. And so I spent a lot of time traveling and building up these relationships with the subsidiary managers because they're on the front line. I mean, they're the ones hearing directly from the government or from the public about these kinds of issues. And so they would escalate to me. And since I'm there in headquarters, I could act much more quickly and basically help them out and make sure action is taken on the headquarters side. And so that, and of course there was speaking at different conferences and just traveling to different subsidiaries for the sake of not only strengthening that bond, but sometimes we had to diffuse a lot of issues.
Do you have like an example of like a really great story of an issue you diffused that you like to tell? I'd be curious.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I do. There's so one, probably the most infamous one, involved a game called Kakadu, and that was a game on the original Xbox. And usually, when I say that name, very few people, if any, say, "Oh yeah, I remember that game."
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
And there's a reason people don't remember it, because it only existed on the shelf for about 3 or 4 months. And the reason is because in the late stage of production, they found an audio file that had chanting from the Quran, for the Islamic Quran, in the game. And we very quickly determined this cannot be shipped this way. This is inappropriate. And so what we had a discussion, so they agreed, the product team agreed, we're going to fix it right away. So they swapped out that audio file and put in something else. But the issue was, we already had a bunch of package units that were literally at that moment on their way to stores. They were on trucks moving to different retailers.
Can I ask, I'm just curious, like, why was that not okay? Like, just from a layman perspective.
No, absolutely. I'm glad you asked, because there's more context. So the game is an M-rated game, so it's violent. It's because the game, the kind of the hallmark of Kakadu Chojin, the subtitle of it was Back Alley Brutal, and it was a hand-to-hand fighting game, so sort of Mortal Kombat-ish kind of thing, but it was taking advantage of the latest coding revelations about how you could have the characters beat each other up, and you could actually see a progression of damage on the characters as they fight. So they start to bruise and bleed, and arms broken and dangling and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
I remember when that was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
It feels just like status quo now, but there was a time when that was like a really big deal.
Yeah, exactly. So it was basically, it was a way to, of course, show off the technology of the original Xbox, say, hey, look what we can do. And so having this audio file, which was from the Quran, having that in the context of this bloody, violent game was just inappropriate.
Gotcha.
It's just not. It's not the context in which you would normally find that particular passage of the Quran, or in any context like that. So we basically said, we can't. This can't stand. We can't leave it like this. So we had these, package units, and the decision was to basically release them in the U.S. And I fought against it, because I'm like, the U.S. is not a homogeneous society. There are, there are millions of Muslims in the U.S., and Detroit's like 50% Muslim. And basically they just they just said, yeah, okay, whatever, don't worry about it.
It's not like that's your job or anything. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, the frustrating part for me is that the amount of money that was at stake with destroying those packaged units is less than I knew that was the cost of some internal parties sometime at Microsoft. Right, it's like, it really wasn't that much money. It was, a company that size, they could have easily eaten that amount of money and it wouldn't have much effect. But they decided that they needed to get these released. And so sure enough, after a few months, the company receives a letter from the government of Saudi Arabia that basically was a form of cease and desist letter that was basically instructing the company that they had offended the Muslim faith, and that, this was a very serious issue. And this got picked up in the newspapers in the Middle East, starting in Dubai and Riyadh, and it really started catching fire. I mean, it was a caustic issue, and it really started getting out of hand from a PR perspective. And there was a lot of negative commentary and pushback on Microsoft in the region. And so eventually the decision was made, is that I got a call from the head of the Microsoft Middle East region, and he said, is there any way that you can come here and help diffuse this situation? Because we need somebody from headquarters to come and basically represent headquarters and explain what's going on, because we don't know. I mean, it's, they're the subsidiaries. They're just, basically representing the company. They don't know the nitty gritty details of what happened. And so I decided, I decided with my manager's blessing to go ahead and go on this trip. And this was actually the thing that made this more intriguing. And this was like 5 days before the second Gulf War was starting. So that added just some little extra pressure. But I ended up going to Riyadh, and I had to sit in front in a room, no windows, big round table, big meeting room, and across from me was were representatives of the Saudi Arabian Religious Council of the government, along with a couple of reporters. And I had two people from Microsoft on each side of me, and basically helping me out. And essentially what happened is that they asked me a bunch of questions about, Microsoft's role in the Middle East. So while I was there just to talk about the game, they were asking really substantial, fundamental questions. Like the first question I was asked is, why did Microsoft open its first office in the Middle East in Israel and not an Arab country? Then it, like, another question, why did Microsoft release
softball questions? Yeah.
Yeah, why did Microsoft release Office 97 in Hebrew before Arabic? And on down the list went.
Oh, man.
And eventually we did talk about the game, and I did apologize. And there was kind of this furious discussion across the table from me once I gave my official apology. And it was in Arabic, so I didn't understand it. And of course, they turned back to me and just very quickly said, "Thank you for your time." They got up, left the room. I had to ask the Microsoft guys, "So what just happened here?" And they said, "Well, they were discussing whether or not your answer was sufficient." And of course, my response was, "Well, what would have happened if it wasn't?" And they both kind of shrugged, like, "I don't know." Fortunately, it was sufficient. So I went on to have to go to Dubai and elsewhere to help do damage control on this issue. And
that's amazing.
So I get back to Microsoft, and a couple weeks later, the VP of the games division, Robbie Bach, contacted me. And basically, I had been lobbying for like about 2.5 to 3 years for them to formalize this process. And there was some level of resistance because, games are edgy, games are different, games don't have to do this kind of stuff. And yet the risk is just as real, and it's just as viable to the business as well as it is to the customer. And so basically, he reached out to me after I got back from this trip and said, "Hey, that stuff you've been telling us to do, I think we should do that now. I think that would be a really good idea." So, and it's true.
And also we should have listened to you, what you said about that game.
Well, yeah. I mean, I didn't want to say I told you so, and I actually never did, but I did tell them. I warned them. So, but this is true of many companies that I've worked with. A lot of them have to go through that crucible on their own.
Right.
They don't fully wrap their head around exactly what the issue is and the level of risk until they've gotten burned by it, and then they like, "Oh yeah, okay, now we get it," and that's pretty common.
Yeah.
Yeah. You described yourself also as an advocate in the games industry. What work do you do in that effect?
Yeah, so I basically in my later years in the game industry, because this is as of this month, this is April 2019. This is my 26th year in the game industry, and so in all that time, I've worked alongside some really, really remarkable people. I mean, I love these people. I love their skill, the creativity. I mean, everything they do, all these different projects I've been able to work on. I feel so lucky and privileged to have been able to do it. From Halo to all the BioWare games of the last 18 years and so on. And so I really admire these people. And so after I left Microsoft, I joined the International Game Developers Association just as a member because I knew that would have been a way to connect better with the game industry. And after a couple of years, I created the Localization Special Interest Group in the IGDA because there wasn't one, and I felt there needed to be a community for those people. And then I got involved in running the IGDA.
By the way, sorry, I just want to help our listeners too, because I think a lot of people don't know what the IGDA does. So can you give a quick pitch about what you do there, or what the IGDA does? Yeah.
So the International Game Developers Association has been around for 25 years. And basically, it was created in 1994 as a way for developers to advocate for their craft. In much the same way that Hollywood has different vocal groups, of course, all of them are unionized. The game industry currently is working on that issue. The IGDA is not a union. It was just basically a professional association that was formed to give developers a voice and to give them a focal point where they can come together and talk about their craft as well as advocate for their craft. Now, in the game industry, you've got trade associations that advocate on behalf of companies. So like the Entertainment Software Association, the ESA that runs E3, that's like their main event they run every year. The ESA, they represent companies, not developers. So all the big companies, Electronic Arts and Microsoft and Nintendo, Sony, on and on and on. Most of these companies are members of the ESA, and the ESA's function is primarily to act as a lobbying organization, and that's what they do. That's why they're based in Washington, D.C. So they're there to run interference for the game industry when the government gets upset at us for assuming that we cause violence and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
And so that's basically the function of a trade association, and many countries have some form of trade association representing their game industry. The IGDA was formed to represent basically the rank and file workers, the people who are in the trench actually doing the work and making the games. And there's a lot of conversation that we can get into if you want about the viability of that organization, whether or not it's been effective. However, on my personal level, I got involved because I wanted to connect better with the industry. Because when I did leave Microsoft in 2005, I consciously decided that I really want to focus on games more than anything, because that's where my heart is, and I really want to do that work, even though I do a lot of non-game stuff too. And so after I created the Localization SIG Special Interest Group as a community for people who translate and adapt games for the international market, I also got involved in running the Seattle chapter of the IGDA. And then eventually in late 2012, I was approached about being the executive director of the entire global organization, which I did. And so the reason I did it is because in my later years, as I think is true of a lot of people who are in an industry long enough, you start seeing things that really bug you, that you want to see changed. Like, I think a lot of people know about the crunch issue in the game industry, about working with...
We do now,
Well, yeah.
I think that hasn't been the case for, even in the last couple of years, I think it's just become a big deal. But even before that, we knew about it, but people didn't talk very openly about it, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think a lot of the public wasn't really fully aware of the conditions under which a lot of the games they love are made. And those conditions actually often suck. Basically,
Yes.
That's a great way to put it. It's very articulate.
There's, management. When we talk about crunch, what we're talking about is when management mandates to the workers that you will work a 16-hour day, or you will work 18 hours, or you'll do whatever you have to do to get this game out the door. And of course, if you complain about it, a lot of times management has sometimes used the argument saying, well, hey, yeah, that's fine. You can go home. Go ahead and go, because I've got 20 people ready to take your place.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've got 20 eager students or younger people who are, blinded by the joy of wanting to work in the game industry. And yet they'll find out very quickly that it's not such a joy when you're working in those kind of conditions.
Right.
So that kind of thing is something that really pissed me off, and I wanted to see it change. And also the lack of diversity in our industry. I mean, we're only 20% women on average throughout this industry, and people of color are even less.
In terms of developers?
Yeah, developers meaning, when I use the term developers, that basically means anybody who has anything to do with the creation of the game.
Right.
That not just the programmers. I mean, that's like the artists, the writers, everything. And so on average, on a global scale, it's about 20% of the industry is women. That varies, of course, from locale to locale. The representation of people of color, especially in like North America, is even worse. It's a much lower percentage. And so this is something where we have to make a change. I mean, I'm a firm believer that, the more diverse that your staff, the better kinds of games you can make. And it's not just about the numbers. It's not about just making sure you have X many women or whoever. What it is, it's about the concept of inclusion, that you're trying to cast a wide net of inclusivity around creative thought, because not everyone thinks the same, not everyone approaches things the same.
Right.
Men and women approach things differently. People from different backgrounds, underrepresented groups, different cultures, different geographies, they all bring something else to the table. And so the more diverse and inclusive you can make your team, ultimately, the more potential success your game can be, because you're actually making a game that's going to appeal to a much, much broader audience.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. No.
So, yeah.
I think there's a lot of people, like, I'm totally with you, but I think there's a lot of people that hear that, and, like, there's this fear amongst, for lack of a better word, like the hardcore gamer or something. Like,
Right.
I know that's a term that a lot of people would dispute, and I get that, but there's like this fear amongst some of those types of people that what you're saying is going to like keep their games from appealing to them. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
I know. I know. Trust me. I mean, when I was running the IGDA, I was running the IGDA when Gamergate was a big deal. And so for 2 years, I was harassed, had death threats from them, and was just constantly dogged by these people who felt that my presence as a woman leader in the game industry was a threat to everything they know and love. And so I'm extremely familiar with this train of thought. And even people who don't identify with that particular movement, I get that people have a fear that, changing those who make games is somehow going to change the games. And that is just a complete and utter fallacy. I mean, when they think about there are a lot of people who have made a tremendous amount of influence over certain game types that they love. I know, for example, one of the core AI programmers who worked on Assassin's Creed, and she's amazing. She's moved on to other stuff now. She's not at Ubisoft anymore, but she was responsible for some of the core AI that made Assassin's Creed what it is today. I mean, the head of 343 Industries that makes the Halo games is a woman, Bonnie Ross. She's amazing. It's like there's women in key roles across the board who have had a lot of experience and they've had a role to play. That hasn't diminished the quality of the games. It hasn't diminished the nature of the games. So I tend to think it's an irrational fear that when you see more diversity, they think, oh, now it's all going to be dumbed down, or it's going to be all pink characters, or some kind of ridiculous stereotype about what these underrepresented people are going to bring to the table. But the reality is all you're doing is taking a game that's known and loved, or a type of game that's known and loved, like a first-person shooter, which happens to be my favorite kind of game, and just making sure that, it's accessible for everybody to play. It's not changing the game itself.
It's funny because like you kind of alluded to this a minute ago, but like, even if we take out all of the moral and ethical reasons to include more diversity and stuff, like just as a business decision, like you alluded to this, that you're increasing the amount of people that will potentially pay money for your game.
Exactly.
Like even if we take out all that other, I mean, what I say, more meaningful stuff, but even if we took all that out and just say, hey, as a business decision, like you can potentially make more money by doing this.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. I mean, a lot of people see it as some kind of creative threat, which is, again, I think that's complete fallacy. But from a business perspective, basically, people who play games are already multifaceted, multicultural, multigender, multiracial. I mean, it's like those who play games are already, represent the broad spectrum of humanity, because gaming has now become yet another form of entertainment, as common as listening to the radio or reading a book or watching a movie or playing sports or whatever. So gaming is here to stay. And it's not to stay either. I mean, gaming is something we've been doing since the beginning of human civilization.
Right. Yeah.
It's nothing new, but the fact that video gaming and electronic gaming and interactive entertainment, this is something that humans do now, and we all do it to some degree, and we know that the demographics of those who play games is completely varied. And so basically the goal has been at this point to make sure that those who make games better represent those who are already playing them. And that's really all it's about.
I'd be curious to hear if you would have any advice for like the average listener of this podcast about how they can, I don't know, like be of help with this regard, because I think like I know a lot of people, personal friends of mine, who have bowed out of participating in the games industry because of a lot of the things you're talking about. They just got burnt out. It's just they felt people of color and a lot of women just bow out eventually. I think because it's just hard. It can be disheartening after a while, and I totally respect them for doing that. I totally respect the people who buckle down and stick with it as well. But I can totally understand. I mean, and it's not just those people. Like, it's not just people of color. It's the industry chews up and spits out a lot of people in general. I think.
It does.
So I'd be curious to hear, like, what can the average layman, gamer, person who's into games, do to, be an advocate, be of help, make this industry a more welcome and inclusive place?
Well, in my view, it's really, really simple. It's like, just, be kind to one another. It's kind of the golden rule thing. Treat others as you would have them treat you. And honestly, I think it can be that simple. It's like, we don't have to be a-holes online. We don't have to, express our frustrations and our shortcomings and all these other things that we might be dealing with or struggling with. We don't have to express them and vent them at other people in the form of a gaming environment. Sure, some people go online to play games and they do vent frustrations of the day. I mean, I do it. I mean, I will, you can find me in a Halo multiplayer game still to this day when I feel particularly frustrated, because I feel like I just need to kind of get out that energy. But I'm not going to shout at someone online. I'm not going to yell at them. I'm not going to do anything that makes them feel not included. And so it's basically, if every single person who went into an online environment was just nice to one another and not make assumptions or be dicks about things, I think it would make a big difference. But human nature is what it is. I mean, we can't rely on people to, quote, do the right thing. And that's why we have to put all these restrictions in place and verifications and all these other problems that we keep persisting, because some people just, they just feel that, it's kind of, to quote The Dark Knight, they just, some people just want to cause chaos. They just want to disrupt things. And that's how they get
There's always that, there's always the one person. I had this thought the other day. There was a car commercial that came on between whatever Hulu show I was watching. And, they always have the fine print at the bottom: professional driver, closed course, do not attempt. Like, anytime I see those kinds of things, it's because of that one person that did it, Yes. That one person that just, that was the dick. It was the one person that was the dick.
It's true.
That caused us to have to put those safeguards in place or whatever, It just made me think of that when you were saying that.
Well, it's true. It's just, and it's unfortunate, because it's like you have a, mostly small group of people who are responsible for the bulk of the harassment and bulk of that behavior online. And it's just, the problem is that there's not safeguards in place to stop this kind of thing from happening on a regular basis. And I know there's all kinds of, ideas that have been put out there, from, making sure that nobody can be anonymous to, there's companies now that specialize in using AI to help find the harassers and the trolls and kind of put them in a holding cell, so to speak, online, so that they can't affect anybody if the behavior is discovered. Because it is sort of a, it's a non, it's an asymmetrical situation where you've got, any given company that has an online community, even if it's Microsoft or Sony, you've got tens or even a few hundred of people, maybe, but usually not, against millions and millions of people. And it's just so unbalanced. You have to have some other kind of tool set to rely upon to deal with all this stuff. And ultimately, in my view, the way you really deal with it is just, if you can get people to just treat each other with some act of kindness and just be welcoming to others. I mean, you want people to play with, you want to, to invite people into the environment, and And it's really hard when you've got a few people who just insist on being dicks about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a caught, I think it's a caught behavior too, like in either direction. Cause like it makes me think of Riot Games and League of Legends, and like they've done, I mean, those guys have been working so hard to figure, cause that's a game that people often reference as just a toxic cesspool of negativity. But I can think back to when I was playing League, or even just other online games, and like in either direction, the behavior is caught. If it's one person that's being super negative and raging or whatever, then you notice the other people will start to kind of pick up on that behavior. But then in the other direction, if somebody's being overly complimentary or kind or gracious or whatever, then that gets caught as well. So I think what you're saying, what can people do? Like, be kind and watch how that can be caught by other people.
Yes, I agree. And basically just be committed to watching each other's back. It's just like, because any person in this environment can be a target. And so nobody wants to be a target for any reason, because a lot of times the targeting is just random and stupid. And so, if we just band together, and especially, and I hear it happen sometimes, but it's not happening enough, is where if you hear, like, it happens a lot when a woman gets on her mic and everyone knows it's a woman on in the group and they're about to go into a fight or something, and inevitably she starts getting a pile on of harassment, and other people, other guys, even if they feel that this is wrong, they don't say anything. And it's just like, and of course, and then they say something and they're called all kinds of names too. But honestly, I'd much rather see someone stand up and make a defense and at least show that it's not going to go unchecked by the community.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Communities can rally around that kind of thing too, if we'll just, with a little bit of effort, with a little bit of, so we do want to get into like who you are and your background and stuff. And so you talked about this a little before we were on the air, but where'd you grow up?
So I was born in Los Angeles, and yay! So I lived there.
I live in Ventura, so I'm not far from LA.
Oh, cool! So I was born in LA and grew up in Sun Valley, which is right next to Burbank Airport. And then when I was about, I think, 4 years old, we moved south to Orange County, to San Juan Capistrano for about a year, because my dad got a teaching job at Mission Viejo High School, and he was a geology and earth science teacher as well as a football and wrestling coach. And so we all moved down to South Orange County, and then eventually moved into Mission Viejo, where my parents are still living in that same house after all these years.
Oh, wow.
And so I grew up there and basically was there and did my first year. I went to Mission Viejo High School where my dad taught, and then I did my first year of undergraduate work in aerospace engineering at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And then I went back home and did the rest of my schooling in industrial design and geography at Cal State Long Beach. So yeah, I worked there. Then I worked for a year at Thomas Brothers Maps in Irvine as a cartographer, and then that's when I decided I really wanted to go to grad school and kind of keep pursuing my intellectual ideas, so to speak, and that's what took me to Seattle in 1989.
Wow.
Cool. What were some of those intellectual ideas you were interested in?
Well, one of the things I was really interested in, and I didn't know it at the time, but once I got on the campus at the University of Washington in Seattle, I was really interested, and I always have been interested in the difference between what is real, the quote real world, how is the real world represented, and then how is that interpreted or perceived. And it's kind of those different layers of the interaction between what is reality, how do we view reality, and then or how do we represent it, and then how do we actually view it or perceive it. And that's why when I did my master's degree in geography and finished it in 1991, it was called Virtual Worlds Technology as an interface to, as a human interface to geographic information. So basically, I did my master's thesis on VR in 1991.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Back when the technology really was not that great.
Back before the Matrix came out.
Yeah, exactly. That was 8 years before the Matrix came out. So
they stole your idea. You should get some rights to that. Or
yeah, I
something.
agree. I should talk to Keanu about that. But
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so I was really interested in this idea of using VR, and mostly, to be honest, most of the dissertation was about augmented reality and about how we could have augmented reality interfaces. In fact, I actually drew a picture pixel by pixel on my Mac Paint program because I wrote it all on my old Macintosh.
Oh,
and it showed somebody wearing something that looks very similar to a HoloLens. So when the HoloLens came out, I kind of said, I don't know. Somebody may have looked up my thesis.
You are the OG, Kate. Like, OG.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that was...
Would you like to...
yeah, anyway.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that was my intellectual pursuit. I was basically kind of seeing how can we push cartography into the 21st century.
Yeah. That's really cool. It's amazing that intersected you with the different things that you've done. Like, that's really cool. We do like to ask people, like, were you religious growing up? Was your family involved in any kind of church or anything? Yeah,
absolutely. So my parents, when I was super young, they went to a Baptist church, and I barely remember that. It was somewhere in LA. But my parents became Christians, I think, shortly before I was born. Mm-hmm. And so I was born into a Christian family, and went to Sunday school and everything. When we moved down to Mission Viejo, we attended a Presbyterian church for several years, and then that church had some kind of schism occur because I think the Presbyterian Church of America, whatever the council is, issued some decree, and our pastor just didn't agree with that interpretation. He's like, he felt it was a deviation from the Bible. So,
you don't remember what it was?
I don't, because I was young. I was in elementary school still. The most I remember about that particular church is getting one of my two front teeth knocked out in the playground.
Oh, no.
Not over a religious debate. It was just goofing around. But then, so when the church split, about a third of the people stayed and the rest left. And so they went and formed, and they basically followed this pastor, and he formed a new church called Grace Community Church, which was formed in El Toro. And so that church really thrived, and my mom created their preschool program there because that was her background. Mm-hmm. And the church really took off. It became one of the fastest growing churches in Southern California at the time. And we went there for quite a few years. And then eventually, when I was around the time I was in high school, or I think I just left high school, I forget exactly. But that church then had this schism because the pastor, the same one who left the Presbyterian church, he started becoming like super dogmatic. So for example, when during the offering, they would have somebody sing, just sing a song or a hymn or something. And when the offering was done, people would clap. They'd clap for the person because they're showing their appreciation. Well, he didn't like that. Mm-hmm. He didn't like people clapping in church. So he would get up there and
it was bringing glory to that person or something.
Yeah, exactly.
God, was that his thing? Okay.
I think so. I think that was kind of the crux of it. But then again, and then we had this remarkable high school pastor who was very formative with my thinking. I just think he was amazing. His name was Dave Mattson. And he was just a great guy. And so sometimes when he was asked to give the service in the main church, he was a young guy. He had, I wouldn't call him necessarily liberal thinking, but he was just very energetic. He was such a great contrast to the pastor who was there. And I think the main pastor did not like it because a lot of people liked Dave.
Yeah, that's often a problem.
Yeah, and so sadly, because of this, the elder pastor, because of his dogmatic approach as he got older, the church had another schism. And so then that church body was fractured, and my parents left. and which was painful for them. My dad was an elder of the church at one point. My mom created their preschool program. Right. I had great times in high school, learning from Dave Mattson and his leadership of the entire high school group. I thought was great. And then my parents actually ended up at a brand new church that had just started up that was called Saddleback Church, run by Rick Warren.
Never heard of it.
Yeah. So my parents ended up being part of Saddleback Church, where they still are. I mean, my mom served in the missions group there for many years. My dad, they both volunteer still at the church. My sister-in-law is one of the junior high pastors at Saddleback Church. I know Rick well. I know Rick Munchow, who used to do the music there.
You know Rick Warren well? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I know Rick.
Oh, wow.
I know him. I mean, when my parents, when they had their 50th wedding anniversary, which was, that was 10 years ago. This is their 60th. Okay. So 10 years ago, when they basically did a renewal of their vows, Rick was the one presiding over that. They asked him if he would, and he did. And when my grandmother passed away, she had been quite a fixture. She was living with us. She helped out with like Meals on Wheels and all that kind of service kind of thing. And so Rick, he also was there to speak at her funeral, which was very nice of him. So yeah, and cool. So that was kind of the church journey, the faith journey for myself. I mean, I've always identified as a Christian, but going through all those different schisms of the church body kind of really underscored for me just how problematic it is when human beings get involved.
Yeah.
Because
it's interesting to hear you talk about this, because we've had a lot of people on this and it's like a tough question, but we've had a lot of people on the podcast who talk about how the work they do in the games industry in part is motivated by this like internal belief that human beings are basically good. Like you boil it down, they're basically good. And then a lot of what you've shared with us is talking about how you have to prepare for how human beings mess everything up.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of the work that you do has been tied to that,
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, it's like my, as you would probably expect of most people with, I think, a Christian point of view, is that they wouldn't say good or evil. They said the fundamental thing is that humans are sinful. It's not that they're good or evil. It's just that they're sinful, which basically means they do things which is counter to what God has basically intended for us to do. And and that, I would say, that's more along my line as well. I mean, I've been around long enough. I turned 54 this year, and I see a tremendous amount of goodness in people all around the world. I still travel an extensive amount all over the place. I really believe in the Mark Twain quote that travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. It's great, one of the reasons I went into geography, because I love people, I love culture, I love difference. I really do. I mean, some of my very best friends are of all kinds of different faiths. We get along really well. We don't debate each other. We'll discuss politics, we'll discuss faith, we'll discuss issues like that, but it's always with kind of a heart of fondness for one another. Because we don't. It's
amazing what you can talk about if you start with that heart of fondness.
Yeah. I think
we think there's all these topics these days that we think there's all these topics these days that are off limits.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times we think they're off limits because we don't love and trust each other yet.
I totally agree. And so it really disturbed me, for example, during the 2016 election. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. I'm just basically a cynic, because I do geopolitics for a living. and yes,
that'll do that to you.
And and I vote because I do my civic duty. But it's just like I mean, of course, and I've been much more vocal post-election. I'm like, I can't even believe we're living in the bad version of 1985 from Back to the Future 2. It's such a weird world we live in. It's like I don't even know who that person is in the White House. But
what a time to be alive.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. So,
gosh.
But it's I saw friends, and I still see it today to some degree, when they say, I'm going to unfriend this person because they're a Trump supporter or because they support Hillary or whatever. And I'm like, why? you can't have a difference of opinion and still be friends. It's like, it's, we already know that, the technology we have today and the social media technology in particular is designed to maximize social bubbles, and a lot of that maximization is happening because you can commoditize people and make them good consumers in different groups.
Totally.
But it really disturbs me because I remember some people got a little pissed off because I called some people out and said, where do you draw the line after politics? If you're going to unfriend somebody because they have a whole different political view, what about their religious views? What about their views on other social issues? Are you really going to unfriend them just because of that? You're not willing to reach out to them and just try and understand why they have this different point of view. And that's been a driving force for me. I hold a Christian world.
You can get unfriended for saying that.
Well, exactly. You can. And at this point in my life, I don't care what people do. They can unfriend me. They can friend me, whatever. I don't need to apologize for what I believe. And I don't need to justify it. I believe it because I believe it. I kind of like that line from, if there's one good thing that came from Prometheus, the Alien prequel, I like when Elizabeth Shaw, when she says, it's what I choose to believe. I don't need to justify it. I don't need to explain it. It's what I choose to believe. Mm-hmm. And I think we all are that way. We base what we believe on evidence that we see and on our life experience. And my life experience basically reinforced my Christian belief. I know other people where it didn't, and they don't believe that anymore. They believe other things or nothing at all. Mm-hmm. In my case, that wasn't the case. And with all the traveling I've done and with all the interaction I've seen with a lot of people, it basically just made things clear to me. And yet, I love that difference. I love interacting with people from all over the world. Last year when I had the chance to go to Iran for a game conference, and you hear all the nasty stuff in the media about Iran and how evil they are and all that kind of stuff. Right. And I'm like, these are amazing people. These people who are having the same struggles we are, the same concerns we are about their government and all these things. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, but yet we paint them with a broad brush. And it basically confirmed for me something I've known for a while, which basically for any given place, usually about 80% of the people there are exactly the same as everywhere else, which means they're human beings. They love their family. They want the best for their kids or for themselves. They just want to be happy. They want to do something that's meaningful, and that's it. And then you got it 10% on either end of the spectrum who basically try and screw that up for those 80%, And that's that. That's a high generalization, but that's kind of how I do things. And that 10% could be split because of religion. They could be split because of politics. They could be split for all kinds of reasons.
Right. So I'm interested, just in the short time we've gotten to get to know you a little bit. It's so clear. And as you've said already a couple times of you just love difference. You love diversity. You love different perspectives and that kind of stuff. And I'm curious, can you pinpoint where that came from? Either growing up, was that a high value for your parents that they instilled in you? Or, was that something from your faith or learning about Jesus or that kind of stuff? Is there any kind of things you can point to that you feel kind of grew that in you?
Yes, I think it's a combination. So I think it was built on the foundation of the way my parents are. My parents are very loving people. I've seen them take people in. They actually had at one point 2 additional people living in our house because these people that were under such hardship, and one of these people was a gay man who was having some struggles. And of course, at that time this is in the 1980s or even late 70s. And that was something that was kind of unheard of. That why would a Christian?
Well, was that kind of around all the AIDS panic stuff too?
Yes,
kind of
exactly. Yes. Yeah. And so at the time, it's why would you do that? That's bad. That's how could you possibly do that? But my parents have always had this incredible heart of love and service, and I know especially, for both of them. And my dad has, I think, always been a great example of what a servant can be. He is very much a leader kind of person, and a lot of people look to him as a leader. But I mean, honestly, my management style that I've used ever since then, I really have pointed people to my dad's example, who taught me that leadership means service. It means that if you're a manager, your job is to take care of the people underneath you, not to drive them forward and whip them and, demand of them and take credit for them. Basically you're there to shepherd their needs. And that is a very Christ-like attitude. And even Christ in many examples in the Bible showed that, our job and our mandate is to care for people who can't, or who are in need.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And, and it's just like, I totally understand many of my atheist friends who point to either the incidents in their past or things that they witness on, an ongoing basis where they say, well, that's not a Christian attitude. That pastor did this or that priest did that. And I'm like, I absolutely agree with you. It's like they are not exhibiting the kind of behavior they should. And you have every right and every reason to feel angry at them and to question the faith, in general, not just question that person's faith, but question why would somebody of that background do this? And it's like, well, that's because people, again, are, to me, they're not inherently, I mean, they're inherently broken in some way.
Right.
And so I think, building that on the foundation of my parents, that basically trying to be colorblind, trying to be blind to the whatever circumstances of that person, where they're from, their culture, their religion, and just basically appreciating them as a fellow human being, who's on this planet together. One of the influences too, I think, was the fact that I grew up loving the space program. And I wanted to be an astronaut at one point. And I love a lot of the writings and the discussions of the astronauts who, once they had that opportunity to go into space and they realize how absolutely precious the world is, that, this is all we've got. There's nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
There is nobody else. Here we are. And so if we can't figure out how to get along together and to be caretakers of one another and of where we are, then we're doomed.
Yeah.
Yep. We're not doing such a good job of taking care of it lately, it seems like.
No, we're not.
Yeah. But no, this has been great because I think, like, it just reminds me of, we've had this talk with different people on the show before, but I think that a Christian view of people is a lot more nuanced than maybe we sometimes articulate. Like, I know some Christians that really hammer down on, like, you're totally depraved and you're broken and nothing in you is good, and I think that's can be a really, like, dangerous path to go down, as well as the one that's like, no, people are just great, they're just wonderful. Like, but both of those are, like, a Christian view of people says, no, people are broken, but they're also image bearers, which means they have tremendous potential. We all have tremendous potential to bring order and beauty and benefit to the world around us.
We do, and I mean, Christ Himself said it. They'll know we are Christians by our love. And those behaviors that you see a lot of people exhibit who say that they're Christian, that's not love. That's not showing care. That's not showing concern. It's like I'm an avid cosplayer. I go to San Diego Comic-Con and other cons and have a ton of fun with it. I cosplay as different characters like, the Jane Foster Thorne and Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel and all that stuff. Nice. And a lot of times at these events, you'll see Christian groups who show up with these big signs that say, you're all going to hell, and all this other stuff. And they're shouting, Bible verses at people who are cosplaying as they're walking past. And of course, those people, many of them are mocking them and ridiculing them in return. But I'm just like, how are you possibly thinking that this approach is going to win anybody over to your side? Who's going to listen to you where they're in the midst of doing something they love and enjoy, and you're sitting there shouting Bible verses at them and telling them that they're going to hell? It's like, okay, I get why you're doing it, but it's like, do you really think that in today's day and age, that's the approach to take? And especially and it really kind of comes down to that issue. Is that showing love? Is that helping this person? How is this really making this person's day better? And it's just and I think it'd be hard to answer that question for them.
Well, that's one of the reasons that we exist with our our organization, Love Thy Nerd, is because like we're Christians. You know, we've grown up in both cultures. Like we've grown up in nerd culture and we've seen how that's developed. We've grown up as Christians, a lot of us, and we've seen that hurt and continue to see that hurt. And we know that that's not the Jesus that we know, that we've come to love. And so we're trying to go through and say like, hey, you know, contrary to what you've heard and felt and been screamed at about, Jesus loves you no matter what.
Exactly.
And even if you like Star Trek more than Star Wars, it's okay. even if you're an Xbox user, it's fine.
Yeah.
Whether or not you liked The Last Jedi.
Totally.
There's even for that. There's
actually
forgiveness.
No, that's where we draw the line. That's actually the one place.
Well, I actually thought it was okay. I had more problems with the space physics in that movie than I did with the story. The space physics are just atrocious. But yeah,
that movie took me on a journey of self-discovery because I like The Force Awakens came out and I was all about it. I mean, I was hook, line, and sinker. You know, just for it. And so, you know, the 2 years leading up to The Last Jedi, I mean, I had a box full of expectations for what that movie needed to do to impress me. And of course, Ryan Johnson threw every single one of those expectations out the window, just the way that Luke chucked that lightsaber over his shoulder. And I was pissed after the first time. I mean, like, I was ready to just swear fealty to Star Trek or something. But I took a breath, you know, I read a lot of stuff.
Watch it again.
Drew talked me off the cliff and I went and saw it again and I loved it. Like being able to just view it for what it was and what he was trying to do. Loved it. And of course now, you know, with episode 9 coming and the trailer and Palpatine, all this stuff, I'm pissed again because like I just got onto this. I felt like I just got on the train of like, cool, like let's do something new. Like let's subvert these expectations or I'm sorry, we're going on a Star Wars tangent. You started it, Kate. This is you. This is on you. And now like they released this trailer and it just seems like, okay, why is Palpatine back? Like we're just doing the same tired stuff again. I mean, I'm still gonna watch it and I'll probably like it. I don't know.
I don't know. To me, we can stop this thread. Just tell me. Like when I heard
I'm curious though.
But when I heard Palpatine's laugh, I mean, I'm like, he's been there since episode 1. He's been a part of this whole thing, the whole arc of Anakin and Vader and all that. He's been there as part of it, and I'm not troubled by the idea that he would be around to end the entire 9-movie series, that he would at the very end have some role to play in what happened. But the thing is, they damn well better explain the whole Snoke silliness and what that was all about. You know, it's just like, I'm like, okay, so what, Palpatine was behind that, or, you know, was he just like the front man for Palpatine, or, I mean, who knows? It's just the whole thing. I'm a little frustrated. I'm like, okay, let's just see how it ends. You know, I'm frankly at this point, I'm so much more interested in Marvel and Endgame and everything.
Oh yeah, we've been my wife and I have been marathoning all the Marvel movies leading up to Endgame.
Oh yeah,
and it's like I was kind of burned out on superhero movies, to be honest. Like I was just kind of over it. I mean, 10 years, you know. Yeah, and they all just kind of kept seeming to drop into the same formula. But rewatching all of these, like, it has given me such a like new appreciation for what they've been able to do.
It's pretty amazing.
Like it's wild.
Yeah, but yeah, I have to speak in Bratislava next week, and I already have my ticket to see Endgame there.
Oh, nice.
Because that's where I'm going to be on the 25th. So
in where?
In Bratislava in Slovakia.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you still get to see Endgame. That's exciting.
Yeah. Well, there's no way I'm not going to see it. I mean, it will be in English with Slovak subtitles, but that's totally fine.
Yeah. Hey, you can handle that. Cool. Well, this has been great. We really enjoyed having you on, Kate.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you.
Fascinating to hear your story about the games industry, and also to hear about your faith. And it's been really great. So thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
What's the best place for people to like follow the work that you do?
I think the best place would probably be on Twitter. So my handle is @Geogrify, which is GEOGRIFY.
Great. And anywhere else anything else you want to plug?
No, I mean, there's just a lot of other stuff I do. I mean, there's like a 50 over 50 list that I'm coming out with again. I did one last year, which basically celebrates people who are over 50 in the game industry, because we tend to highlight youth and all that, I think, a little too much, and we forget about the people who are still working and still amazing game creators. So last year I just on a whim did the 50 over 50 list, which you can find on 50over50list.org, and I'm going to be launching the 2019 version of that soon. And then also probably in the near future, probably within the next several months, I'm going to be launching the Game Creators Legal Defense Fund, which is actually going to be something to give game creators some kind of legal leverage so they can, push back on their companies if they're making them work too much, or, if they're for smaller developers who want to sign a contract with a big publisher, it'll actually give them a legal resource to get help and all that kind of stuff.
That's great.
Great. Cool.
And that's
Very
it.
Cool. And you're also involved in Take This?
Yes, so I'm a board member of TakeThis.org, which I also really encourage people to check out, because Take This was created as a resource for mental health in the game industry, both on the developer side and on the game player side. And so there's a lot of great resources there for people who struggle with mental health issues. And that was one of the first things I did after I left the IGDA role, I joined the board, because that's one of the very common things I saw in a lot of people when I was dealing with people running the IGDA, was people who were dealing with chronic mental health problems in the industry, some of which may have been caused by the working conditions and whatnot, but other people just have issues that they're struggling with, and there's no resources for them. And so that's why this organization was created.
Yeah, that's great. Very cool. Definitely encourage people to check those out. For sure, go check those things out. And you can follow us on all the social medias. Basically, just search for @LoveThyNerd. When you go to Facebook, you're going to want to like the Love Thy Nerd, and then you're going to want to ask to join the Love Thy Nerd community. So if you want to talk about nerdy things with other nerds online on Facebook, go check that out. It's a great community. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm DrewDixon82. Chris is not on Twitter, but you can find him on Facebook. Go check out our articles and podcasts and everything at lovethynerd.com. We have tons of great, tons of really great content. We recently did you were talking about cosplay earlier, Kate, and we recently did an article called "Why Does Cosplay Matter?" So
awesome.
If you've ever had friends that you saw dressing up in costumes and you thought that was weird, we wrote an article about why it's not that weird, and it's actually really great. So go check that out. And I think that's basically it. We have a whole podcast network. Go check out Free Play and the Pull List. The Pull List is our relatively new comic book podcast. It's not really new anymore, but it's still
we can't keep
new.
saying that.
Newer. It's newer than all of our other podcasts.
Newish.
But and we have some Facebook live shows. So we have Beard Bros, where they generally review board games once a week on Fridays, and then we also have Co-optional, in which Matt Warmbier and his wife Erin will play one of the games that they showed on Beard Bros, and give away a copy as well. So go check those out. And that's it for us today. Thanks again, Kate.
Thank
you. Thanks very much.